Shalom, my friends. There's a spiritual law operating in the universe right now that most Americans have completely backwards, and it's keeping millions of hard-working, faithful people trapped in perpetual financial struggle. They're praying for provision, begging God for breakthrough, attending financial seminars, and working multiple jobs, yet the money never comes. The opportunities never materialize. The debt keeps growing. And here's what makes this tragedy even worse. They believe they're doing everything right. They're faithful in church. They tithe consistently. They work with integrity. But their bank accounts remain empty. Their stress levels remain high. And their financial future looks increasingly bleak. The brutal reality hitting American households right now is this. 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, including 48% of those earning over $100,000 annually. This isn't a poverty problem, it's a provision problem. And the Torah reveals why. See, we've been taught that provision is something you chase, something you hunt down, something you force into existence through sheer willpower and endless hustle. The entire American financial culture is built on this lie. Work harder, grind longer, sacrifice more, and eventually provision will come. But the Torah teaches something radically different, something that flips our entire understanding of wealth upside down. Provision isn't something you chase. Provision is something that finds you, but it only finds you when you've created the internal capacity to receive it, steward it, and multiply it. This is what I call the inner presence code, and it's the missing piece that explains why some people seem to effortlessly attract opportunities, resources, and wealth, while others work themselves to exhaustion and barely survive. The statistics reveal a crisis that goes far deeper than economics. Americans collectively hold $17.5 trillion in household debt, mortgages, credit cards, student loans, medical bills, creating a financial prison that 73% of Americans will die still trapped in. The average American retirement account has only $65,000 saved, nowhere near enough to sustain retirement. Meanwhile, financial stress has become the leading cause of anxiety, depression, relationship breakdown, and even physical illness across the country. We've created a culture of external hustle that has completely ignored the internal preparation required for sustainable provision. And the result is a nation full of exhausted people who are financially, emotionally, and spiritually depleted. But here's the hope that the Torah offers. When you understand and activate the inner presence code, when you shift from external chasing to internal preparation, everything changes. Provision stops being something you desperately pursue and becomes something that naturally flows toward you. Opportunities appear without manipulation. Resources arrive from unexpected sources. Doors open that you didn't even know existed. This is how Abraham became wealthy without chasing wealth. This is how Joseph rose from prison to palace without networking his way up. This is how the Israelites had their needs met daily in the wilderness without stockpiling or stressing. The pattern throughout Torah is consistent. God provides for those who prepare themselves internally to receive, steward, and multiply His provision. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to activate this ancient code in your modern life, transforming your relationship with money, opportunity, and abundance forever. Let's begin. America is experiencing a provision crisis that transcends economic cycles, political administrations, and market conditions. This isn't about recession or inflation. This is about a fundamental breakdown in how provision flows into people's lives. And the data reveals a pattern that should terrify every American. We're working harder than ever before, yet experiencing less financial security than any previous generation. The hustle culture that promised prosperity has instead delivered exhaustion, debt, and widespread financial anxiety. Let's look at the numbers with brutal honesty. The average American now works 1,691 hours per year. That's 44.8 weeks of full-time work, more than workers in almost any other developed nation. Yet despite this increased labor, real wages have remained essentially stagnant for the past 40 years when adjusted for inflation. Meanwhile, the cost of essentials has exploded. Housing costs have increased 118% since 2000, healthcare costs are up 97%, and college tuition has skyrocketed 169%. The mathematical reality is devastating. Americans are working more hours to afford less life. The hustle isn't working, the grind isn't producing results, and the financial stress is literally killing people. A Harvard study found that financial stress contributes to 120,000 excess deaths annually in the United States through heart disease, stroke, and suicide. But here's where it gets even more revealing. The provision crisis isn't equally distributed. There's a clear pattern emerging where some people seem to attract opportunities, resources, and provision effortlessly, while others work twice as hard and gain half as much. Traditional economic theory can't explain this disparity. Same economy, same market conditions, vastly different results. The Torah, however, explains it perfectly. Proverbs 10:22 declares, "The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil for it." Notice the distinction. There's wealth that comes through painful toil, external hustle and struggle, and there's wealth that comes through the blessing of the Lord, provision that flows naturally. The Hebrew word for painful toil is etzev, which means sorrowful labor, anxious striving, and exhausting effort that produces minimal results. This is the American provision crisis in a single word. Millions of people locked in etzev, working themselves to death while provision remains elusive. The external hustle culture has failed because it's operating outside the divine design for how provision actually flows. And no amount of grinding harder will fix a problem rooted in spiritual misunderstanding. So if external hustle isn't the answer, what is? The Torah introduces a principle that's so counterintuitive to modern thinking that most people dismiss it as impractical. Yet it's the foundation of every significant biblical story of provision. The principle is this: provision flows toward prepared vessels. God doesn't pour water into broken cisterns. He doesn't plant seeds in untilled soil. He doesn't entrust resources to unprepared people. Before provision arrives, preparation must occur, and that preparation isn't external, it's internal. This principle appears throughout Torah with stunning consistency. Before Abraham received the promise of abundant descendants and land, God required him to leave Ur and spend years developing faith, obedience, and spiritual maturity in Canaan. Before Joseph became second in command of Egypt with access to unlimited resources, he spent 13 years in slavery and prison, where his character was tested and refined. Before Moses led Israel to freedom and provision, he spent 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep, seemingly wasted time that was actually divine preparation. Before David became king with all the wealth and authority that position entailed, he spent years in caves, running from Saul, developing the internal qualities necessary to steward a kingdom. The pattern is undeniable. Significant provision requires significant preparation. But notice, the preparation isn't about acquiring external credentials, degrees, or connections. It's about developing internal capacity. The Torah makes this explicit in the story of the tabernacle construction. In Exodus 35:10, God says, "All who are skilled among you are to come and make everything the Lord has commanded." The Hebrew word for skilled is chakam lev, literally wise of heart. Not just technically skilled, but internally wise. Then in Exodus 35:21 we read, "Everyone who was willing and whose heart moved them came." Notice the qualifications for participating in God's provision project. Willing hearts and internal wisdom, not external resumes or previous experience. This reveals the inner presence code. God provides resources to those who have cultivated the internal qualities necessary to steward those resources according to His purposes. Your internal preparation, your character, your wisdom, your faithfulness in small things, your emotional maturity, your spiritual alignment creates capacity for provision. And God, who sees the internal reality rather than the external performance, sends provision to those who are internally prepared to receive it, multiply it, and use it for His glory. This is why Jesus taught that whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Luke 16:10. Provision follows preparation, always. Now let's get specific. What exactly are the internal capacities that attract provision? The Torah identifies 5 critical qualities that must be developed internally before significant external provision can flow. These aren't personality traits you're born with. They're spiritual capacities you cultivate through intentional practice. And when these 5 capacities are present, provision finds you like water flowing downhill to the lowest point. The first capacity is faithfulness in obscurity. This is the quality God tests most rigorously before releasing major provision. In Luke 16:10-12, Jesus establishes the principle: whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? The American mindset says, "Give me the big opportunity, and I'll prove myself." But God's economy operates in reverse. Prove yourself in the small, hidden, unnoticed tasks, and I'll give you the big opportunity. Joseph proved faithful managing Potiphar's household before managing Egypt's economy. David proved faithful protecting his father's sheep before protecting a nation. Ruth proved faithful gleaning leftover grain before becoming wealthy as Boaz's wife. The test isn't, what will you do when everyone's watching? It's, what do you do when no one is watching? Your faithfulness in the small, obscure, seemingly insignificant financial decisions, paying bills on time when it's inconvenient, honoring commitments when it costs you, maintaining integrity when you could get away with cutting corners, creates internal capacity for larger provision. God watches how you handle $10 before entrusting you with $10,000. The second capacity is contentment without complacency. This might sound contradictory, but the Torah holds these in perfect tension. Philippians 4:11-12 captures it. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances, whether living in plenty or in want. Contentment means you're not anxious, desperate, or emotionally unstable based on your current financial state. You can rest in God's timing without bitterness or resentment. But contentment isn't complacency. You're still growing, developing skills, and positioning yourself for increase. The difference is internal. Complacent people are lazy and passive. Content people are peaceful and productive. Desperate people repel provision because desperation creates poor decisions, manipulation, and scarcity mindset. Content people attract provision because they operate from rest, make wise decisions, and maintain abundance mindset even in lack. Proverbs 15:16 declares, "Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil." When you develop internal contentment, the ability to be okay regardless of circumstances, you eliminate the desperate energy that sabotages provision. The third capacity is generosity and scarcity. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive principle in the Torah, yet it's non-negotiable for activating provision. Proverbs 11:24-25 states, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." The test of generosity isn't what you give when you have plenty. It's what you give when you have little. The widow who gave her last 2 coins demonstrated internal capacity that impressed Jesus more than the wealthy donors. Mark 12:41-44. When you can be generous in scarcity, you prove you understand provision comes from God, not from your current resources. This breaks the scarcity mindset that blocks provision. Most Americans operate from, when I have more, then I'll give more. But God's economy operates from, give first from what you have, and I'll multiply it into more. This isn't about manipulation or religious duty. It's about developing internal abundance consciousness that attracts provision. The fourth capacity is wisdom in stewardship. Proverbs 21:5 declares, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty." Wisdom means you think strategically, plan carefully, and manage resources with intelligence and foresight. Joseph didn't just receive provision. He managed it wisely during 7 years of abundance to prepare for 7 years of famine. The parable of the talents, Matthew 25, shows that God entrusts resources to those who demonstrate capacity to multiply them, not just store them. This requires developing financial literacy, understanding basic investment principles, learning to budget effectively, and making decisions based on long-term wisdom rather than short-term emotion. The American consumer culture creates financial foolishness, impulsive spending, debt accumulation, and zero planning for the future. Developing wisdom and stewardship creates internal capacity that signals to God you're ready for greater resources. The fifth capacity is patience in process. Hebrews 6:12 instructs, "We do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised." Notice, the inheritance comes through both faith and patience. Most Americans have faith for provision, but lack patience for the process. They want microwave miracles, not crockpot preparation. But Galatians 6:9 promises, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." The agricultural metaphor is deliberate. Farmers don't plant seeds and harvest the next day. There's a season of patient cultivation where nothing visible seems to be happening, but underground, growth is occurring. When you develop internal patience, the capacity to trust God's timing without anxiety, to continue faithful action without immediate results, to endure the preparation season without quitting, you prove you're ready for the provision season. These five internal capacities, faithfulness, contentment, generosity, wisdom, and patience, create a spiritual magnet for provision. Develop them and watch how opportunity, resources, and abundance begin flowing toward you naturally. Understanding the five capacities is valuable, but transformation comes through implementation. So how do you actually develop these internal qualities? The Torah provides a clear, systematic process for building internal capacity that attracts provision. This isn't mystical or complicated. It's practical, biblical, and proven effective throughout 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom. The preparation process begins with what the Torah calls tikkun, inner repair and alignment. Before you can receive provision, you must address internal blocks that repel it. Psalm 139:23-24 models this. "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me." Most Americans carry internal financial wounds, poverty mindsets inherited from parents, scarcity beliefs formed during childhood, fears rooted in past financial failures, or greed disguised as ambition. These internal blocks create energetic resistance to provision. The Hebrew concept of tikkun means repairing what's broken internally. This requires honest self-examination. What are your actual beliefs about money? Do you subconsciously believe wealthy people are greedy? Do you feel unworthy of abundance? Do you carry shame about past financial mistakes? Do you operate from fear rather than faith? Write these down with brutal honesty, then bring them to God in prayer, asking Him to heal these internal wounds and replace lies with truth. This inner repair work is foundational. You cannot attract provision while internally sabotaging it through unhealed beliefs and wounds. The second phase is what I call kavana, intentional practice in daily decisions. The Hebrew word kavana means focused intention, conscious direction of the heart. Building internal capacity doesn't happen through big dramatic moments. It happens through small, consistent, intentional choices in everyday situations. Want to build faithfulness? Start by being impeccably faithful in the small financial commitments no one sees. Pay bills exactly on time. Honor every promise to your children. Return shopping carts. Give accurate change. Want to build contentment? Practice gratitude daily for what you currently have, intentionally celebrating small provisions before demanding bigger ones. Want to build generosity? Start giving immediately from whatever you have now, even if it's just $5 or your time, rather than waiting until you have enough. Want to build wisdom? Dedicate 15 minutes daily to financial education, reading Proverbs, or planning your budget. Want to build patience? When you're tempted to make impulsive financial decisions, pause for 24 hours and pray before acting. These daily practices seem insignificant, but they're building internal capacity like a muscle being exercised. The Torah principle is clear. Small faithful actions repeated consistently create massive internal transformation over time. The third phase is Yisurim Shel Ahava, disciplinary experiences that refine capacity. This is the phase most Americans try to avoid, but it's absolutely essential. The Hebrew phrase means afflictions of love, difficult circumstances that God allows specifically to develop internal strength. Before Joseph received provision as Egypt's prime minister, he experienced 13 years of slavery and false imprisonment. Before David received provision as king, he spent years in caves running from Saul. Before Moses received the provision to lead Israel, he spent 40 years as a shepherd in obscurity. These weren't punishments, they were preparation. Hebrews 12:11 explains, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." Your current financial difficulty isn't random, it's developmental. The delayed provision, the unexpected expense, the income reduction, the career setback, these are Yisurim Shel Ahava, divine training experiences designed to build the internal capacity you'll need for the provision that's coming. The question isn't, why is God allowing this hardship? The question is, what internal capacity is God developing through this experience? When you shift from resistance to curiosity, from complaint to collaboration, you accelerate the preparation process and position yourself for breakthrough. The internal capacity that attracts provision isn't built in comfort. It's forged in pressure, developed in difficulty, and refined in the fire of challenging circumstances that force you to depend on God rather than your own resources. Now here's where the Torah's promises become absolutely breathtaking. When internal preparation is complete, supernatural provision follows with a timing and magnitude that defies natural explanation. This isn't metaphorical. This is literal, observable, financial reality that countless believers have experienced throughout history and continue to experience today. And the pattern is always the same: years of internal preparation followed by sudden, overwhelming supernatural provision. First, prepared vessels experience what the Torah calls pitaron, sudden opening. The Hebrew word appears in Genesis 41 when Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream and is immediately elevated from prison to prime minister in a single day. 13 years of preparation, one day of breakthrough. One moment, Joseph is a forgotten prisoner. The next moment, he's wearing Pharaoh's signet ring and commanding Egypt's resources. This is the pattern of supernatural provision. After sustained internal preparation, God orchestrates circumstances that create sudden, dramatic advancement. You see this with Esther. Years of preparation in the palace. Then one night the king can't sleep, reads the records, and suddenly Mordecai is honored and Haman's plot is exposed. Years of preparation, one night of breakthrough. You see this with David. Years tending sheep and running from Saul, then suddenly Saul dies, the elders anoint David king, and he's ruling from Jerusalem. The American mindset expects linear, gradual advancement, small raises, slow promotions, incremental growth. But biblical provision often operates differently: sustained preparation period followed by sudden, exponential breakthrough. When your internal preparation is complete, God can shift your circumstances overnight in ways that leave you breathless. The promotion you weren't qualified for, the business opportunity that appeared from nowhere, the financial windfall that made no logical sense, the door that opened when every door should have been closed. This is pitaron, supernatural opening that follows internal preparation. Second, prepared vessels experience hatzlacha, supernatural success that exceeds natural explanation. The Hebrew word means prosperity, success, and breakthrough that comes from divine blessing rather than human effort alone. Genesis 39:2-3 describes Joseph in Potiphar's house. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. His master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Notice, Potiphar, a pagan Egyptian, could see that Joseph's success was supernatural. This is the testimony of prepared vessels. Their success is so disproportionate to their efforts that observers recognize divine involvement. The business grows faster than market conditions predict. The investments multiply beyond normal returns. The income increases without corresponding increase in work hours. The opportunities compound in ways that defy probability. This isn't luck. This is Hatslaka, supernatural success that God grants to those who've been internally prepared to steward it. Deuteronomy 8:18 explains the mechanism. Remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. When internal preparation is complete, God releases supernatural ability that makes your efforts exponentially more effective. 1 hour of your work produces what normally requires 10 hours. One conversation creates what normally requires 50 networking events. One decision opens what normally requires years of positioning. This supernatural multiplication is the reward for internal preparation. Third, prepared vessels experience shefa, continuous abundant flow of provision. The Hebrew word shefa means overflow, abundance, and continuous supply that exceeds current need and creates surplus for future needs. This is the promise in Malachi 3:10. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Notice, not barely enough, not just sufficient, but overflowing abundance. When internal preparation is complete, provision doesn't trickle. It floods. This is what Joseph experienced managing Egypt's resources during 7 years of abundance, so much grain that they stopped measuring it because it was like the sand of the sea. This is what Isaac experienced in Genesis 26:12. Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. A 100-fold return in a single season isn't normal agriculture. It's supernatural provision flowing to a prepared vessel. This is what Solomon experienced when God said, "Since you asked for wisdom rather than wealth, I'll give you both wealth and honor." 1 Kings 3:11-13. The provision that follows internal preparation isn't survival level. It's abundance level, overflow level, more than enough level. And it continues flowing because the internal capacity to steward it properly has been developed. The supernatural provision isn't a one-time miracle. It's a sustained state of divine favor that continues as long as the internal preparation is maintained.